Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to the Law Library's Legal Tech Institute program. I'm Joe Lawson, the Deputy Director at the Harris County Law Library, and it's my privilege to welcome you to a very special program. Today's program is Excel Essentials for the Practice of Law. Of course, Excel is something on all of our computers. Whether or not we use it is something that, or whether or not we like using it, I guess is the real point, is something that makes this program a very popular program. Ben Cussman, our speaker today, is a commercial litigator at the firm of Wendell's Marks, and he uses Excel very extensively for all of his work, from e-discovery to document reviews to redaction, everything that legal professionals have to do. He also has plenty of experience with large litigation firms in New York, and in a previous life was an engineer. Ben also is the founder of a popular blog, Excel Esquire, which focuses on the use of Excel in the practice of law. And so we are very happy to have Ben here today from New York. So please help me welcome Ben Cussman.
Thanks, Joe. So, come down to Houston in July, they said. It's beautiful this time of year, they said. No, it really is beautiful, and I'm really glad to be here. I have family in the area, so any excuse to come back here is a welcome opportunity. Thank you, Joe. Joe found my blog a while back. We got in touch with each other, and we've been trying to set this up ever since, so I'm glad we've got it on the calendar. I'm excited to be here. As Joe said, I'm a commercial litigator. I work in New York City, practicing state and federal courts there. And I use Microsoft Excel almost every day, unless I'm writing an appeal brief or something. I'm managing large document reviews. I'm analyzing the work product of my accounting experts. I'm, attacking a privilege log that my adversary is trying to get away with something. One of the most important things that I do as a litigator is I'm reviewing and producing or not producing the documents of my own clients, and I'm evaluating spreadsheets that are produced to me from my adversaries in litigation. A lot of those documents are Excel spreadsheets. I'm going to circle back to that theme later in the presentation when I talk about filters, but really I think it's one of the most important reasons to understand how Excel works, even if you don't like to use it, is that sometimes, again, as Joe said, you have no choice but to deal with spreadsheets, and sometimes the stakes are just really high. For those of you following along on the live stream or watching the recording later, there is an Excel file that I use. I'm going to click over to that now. It's called Presentation Data Excel Essentials, HCLL. So you can get that file off of the email or get it from the Harris County Law Library website, and you can follow along with this presentation. It's the same data that I'm manipulating up here. If you care to follow along and try to replicate what I'm doing. And if you're watching the recording, you'll have the benefit of being able to pause me and try to catch up with what I'm doing. So I think some of the people watching in the room are also following along, so I'll try to go at a speed where you can keep up with what I'm doing. So I think we can jump into it. Most of what I'll be doing today is showing you a lot of neat tricks and shortcuts that will help make you more productive and keep you out of trouble. The first thing I want to point out is that these Social Security numbers are not real. I made them up in Excel. It's just how I do most of everything. It's easy to make up numbers, but we're not divulging any confidential information here, so don't worry about that. So what we're looking at here on this tab called Print and Filter Data is a set of fictitious clients. Column A has a bunch of client matter numbers, Social Security numbers, and for each of these matters, you see you've got data associated with that matter. Some of these are numerical expenses, some of them are dates. Each of the matters has an advocate associated with it. They belong to a certain program. So it's a pretty good example of a big, complicated spreadsheet with lots of different kinds of data in it. So the first set of things I want to explain to you is how to navigate a big worksheet like this, how to display it and print it effectively. Down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's a useful feature where you can zoom in and out. A lot of people don't realize that's down there. There's a bar down here that you can move it in and out. You can zoom way in and zoom way out just by sliding that back and forth. There are also buttons, a plus button, just like in Word, and a minus button. So you can zoom in until you've got a comfortable screen to look at. I'm going to get back to A1. That's one thing about zooming in. You might have to recenter the screen. So I've zoomed in a little bit more to make that easier to see. Another thing about a big spreadsheet like this is that when you open it or create it, you'll usually see the top of the spreadsheet first with all the headers. But as you scroll down, I'm using my scroll bar, you lose that header row because it just winds up off the screen here, and you can see further down. And if you're looking at a lot of names and numbers, sometimes you lose track of what it is you're looking at. In a given column, you got to keep scrolling back up to look at the header row again. By the same token, if you go over to the right to see the rest of the information, now you've lost the names or the client matter numbers over on the left, so you no longer know what you're looking at. You see an expense figure here for $1,968, but the client matter number is no longer on the screen, and you might not know what that number represents anymore. I'm going to hit Control Home. There's your first shortcut to get you back to A1. Wherever you are in the spreadsheet, if you wanted to snap back to the top and the left, you can hit Control Home. That selects cell A1. So that's what I did. I'm going to show you a feature called Freeze Panes. And the Freeze Panes helps keep certain information on the screen all the time, no matter what. And where you find that is up here in a ribbon called View. Okay, so in my version, and this is 2010, you click on the View button. That brings up a set of features. And the one we're going to use is called Freeze Panes. And what I want to do is I want to keep the header row displayed no matter what, and I want to keep the matter numbers displayed no matter what. So I'm going to select cell B2. So that's at the intersection of those two, of the column and the row that I want to keep there. That's the easiest way to think about it. So I'm clicking right in the corner, and everything above it and to the left is going to stay on the screen. I hit Freeze Panes, and then Freeze Panes again. And now, when I scroll down, the header row stays where it is, no matter how far down I go. And when I go over to the right, the matter numbers also stay there. So that helps you navigate without moving back and forth all the time. You can freeze anywhere you want. Maybe I want to keep the matter, and let's keep the first three columns frozen. So I'm going to click in D2. So first I have to unfreeze. So you might not have even known that something was frozen. It might be someone else's spreadsheet. And when the option is unfreeze, that means it was frozen. You click that off, and then you click back to Freeze Panes. Now you can see if you go to the right, those first three columns all stay put. Any questions about how that works? Okay, so let's move on. The next thing I want to talk about is how to print a spreadsheet like this and have it be a useful printout. If you want to know what this is going to look like when you print it, you might have a print preview button already up here on the quick access toolbar, or else you can go to the print menu and look for a preview. I'm going to hit print preview. And what I've got here, and this is just the default printout. I haven't done anything to make it print a certain way. But what it does here is the first page, it's in portrait mode, and it's giving me the first 5 columns and however many rows will fit. The second page is the next 40 or so rows, but we've lost the header, you see. And another couple pages will get us to the bottom of that first side of the spreadsheet. And then page 5 is the other side of the spreadsheet. But now we don't know what each row represents because the matter numbers or whatever the designation was is missing. So, and now when you click down, you're really in no man's land. Got a bunch of stuff without column A and without the headers. And so when you print this out, you know where it's going, right in the recycling bin. And this might be hundreds of pages. So let's figure out a way to make this print sensibly so that it's useful. So it's offering these options to print it and where I want to print it and how. I don't want to print this anymore, so I'm going to hit Escape. Escape will get me out of this print menu and back to the spreadsheet. So the way I like to adjust these settings is to go to a ribbon called Page Layout and Print Titles. So that's not very intuitive, but that's the way you do it. Let me also say that you've got this, you've got a manual that was circulated with the class information. You can also download it if you're following later. Almost everything I'm doing here is in that workbook. There are screenshots of what I'm doing, all the shortcuts, all the witty banter, even, it's all in that workbook. So don't feel compelled to write down everything. I'll try to tell you if there's an extra tip that's not in the workbook, but I've tried to faithfully pack everything in there. So having said that, and again, these instructions I'm giving you now are in the workbook. Page layout, print titles. There's 4 different places here to change things about the printout. I'm going to start with where it says page. So I think since we've got a bunch of columns that aren't fitting on one page, let's print this in landscape. You know, it's rotated, so it'll be wider than it is high, and we can probably squeeze it all onto one page that way. The next useful area where it says fit to, I can tell it to print one page wide, or if there's hundreds of columns or dozens, maybe we can get by with squeezing it onto a 2-page wide printout. Here I think we can do a 1-page wide. So fit to 1 page wide by how many pages tall? You might get stuck here, if there are hundreds of rows, I don't know, should it be 2 pages or 5 pages or 10 pages? The way to cope with that is just to delete that number. And that tells Excel to just print out however many pages it makes sense to print out. Squeeze it onto 1 page wide and take however many pages you need. So it's 1 page wide and blank pages tall. So if we hit print preview now, so now we're getting somewhere. It fits pretty well onto 1 page. And now we've got a 4-page printout. So that's progress. I'm going to hit escape again and go back to the print titles menu and do a couple more things. I want to keep that header row. It's nice to have that header row on every page so you know what you're looking at. The way to get that header row to stick on every page of the printout is to go to this feature called rows to repeat at top. Right there. You see that? It's the 3rd line. We want to repeat row 1. You could make, if you have a complex header, you can make 2 or 3 rows, print on every page. I just want 1 row. So the way I designate row 1 is to get over here on the left side. Do you see that? I'm going to click on the number 1 over here on the left. And it fills in this weird syntax that I personally can never remember. You could just type that if you could remember that. But that's telling it to repeat row 1 on every page of the printout. There's other options here I encourage you to explore and play with. You can, if you click row and column headings, that will reproduce all of these row numbers and A, B, C, D, E column headings in the printout. I find that's effective if I'm doing some complex filtering or hiding rows. Let's say I'm getting a deposition exhibit of some of this data, but I need to manipulate it a little bit to get what's important on one page. I'll add those row and column headings so it's crystal clear exactly what I've printed out. I'm not trying to deceptively print it out. So anyone looking at it can see that certain rows are displayed and certain ones aren't. That's when I click row and column headings, but I'm not going to do that right now. I am going to go to header and footer. And here's something I try to do out of habit. I want to tell the reader exactly what he's looking at, what the file is, what tab of that file it is, and maybe how many total pages there are. And the way I could do that is I hit custom footer, and there are some neat tools here to add this information automatically. I'm going to go to the left section. There's a button here that has the little Excel logo. When you click that, it inserts the name of the file in the footer. I'm going to hit enter to get to the next line. And this button here that doesn't look like much of anything adds the name of the tab. So that's useful. You might, again, if it's evidence, you might have a complicated workbook with a bunch of different worksheets, and there's one particular worksheet you need to print out for a discussion, a depo exhibit, a motion exhibit. So you want to communicate exactly what the file is, exactly which tab in this file you're printing out. Here's a way you can do that by using these shortcut buttons. I would also like to know which page I'm looking at. Okay, it might be a single page worksheet rather, or it might be 500 pages and I'm just printing out the first page. There are buttons here that give you the page number and the total number of pages. So let me start from the beginning. I wanted to say page 1 of 20, page 2 of 20. So the syntax here is I'm going to type the word page, space, and then click this button that gives me the page number, and then a space, the word of, another space, and then this icon with the 2 plus signs, and it generates this thing that says pages. So that's going to say page 1 of 20, page 2 of 20 in my printout. There are other things you can do if you want to make this stuff bigger or smaller or change the font. You highlight the text in question and hit A, and then you can manipulate the font and the typography and all that. I'm going to skip that. Hit OK. And now when I hit print preview, look what I've got. I've got the heading. Down here, I've got the file name, the tab name, page 1 of 4. When I click through, I've still got the headings, I've still got that footer, and it's telling me which page I'm looking at. So again, there's a lot of neat things you can do to develop useful printouts, and the way to really get good at it is to get in there and just fool around with it and experiment with it. I will say, I'm going to hit escape again. I will say, and I've learned this the hard way, sometimes you have a spreadsheet and you email it to people, and it's not the kind of spreadsheet that should be printed out. It's a big, you've analyzed something, or it's a bunch of data, and you're telling people to look at the spreadsheet and look at this column, and what do? They hit print. They forward it to their secretary. Please print this out so I can take it on the train and look at it. And then they get a big stack of garbage. Life's not fair sometimes, and that's one of the things that's not fair. You send a spreadsheet to people, some of those people are just going to print it out, even if it is not going to make a nice printout. So I try to be in the habit of, anytime I send any kind of a spreadsheet to anyone, I take a couple minutes and format it so that it'll be somewhat sensible when they print it out. Otherwise, it looks like garbage, it reflects badly on me. I try to do a little formatting anytime I send someone a spreadsheet, whether it needs to be printed or not. Any questions about the printing? Okay, all right, let's move on. I'm going to look at a tab now that says names. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. What we have here is just a simple list of names, but it's last name, comma, first name. And that format is useful sometimes, but sometimes you want the first names in one field, in one cell, and the last names in another field. You might generate text or a letter. You might need to sort by one name or the other. So it's just not useful in this format. Or it might just be it might say Loretta Alvarez, Gloria Brown, and what you need is to sort by last name. So you have to do something to this text to split it into first and last. If you Google this question, I encourage you to Google your Excel questions. Chances are good that me or someone else has made a YouTube video that tells you exactly how to do this. It's the quickest way to solve a random Excel question. With this particular question, you hit a lot of really complicated explanations that use a lot of weird formulas. I say they're weird. I love these formulas. You can calculate the location of the comma and count how many characters there are, extract that number of characters, paste them somewhere else. Most people don't want to do that. So I'm going to show you a much easier, kind of less intuitive way to accomplish the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a column for the first name and a column for the last name. And I'm going to copy that list of names into these new columns. So I'm selecting the names, right-clicking, clicking copy. I'm going to click in the first cell, and here I can hit Control-V to paste it, or I can right-click and click paste. So these are the same kinds of things you do in Microsoft Word if you're familiar with Word. And here I'm going to hit Control-V. So I've got the same names here in my new columns. And what I want to do is I'm going to turn this column of first names into just the first names. And the way I'm going to do that is with find and replace. But I'm going to use some wildcard characters. So let me first say that most of you probably know how to do a Control-F, which finds something. I want to find where Sharon is in this list. And I hit Find Next. It finds her there, and there, and there. The other side of this dialog box where it says Replace, that's where you can do these neat things. You could, if Sharon is misspelled throughout the whole spreadsheet, you could fix that all at once by doing a global find and replace. You know, there's a couple of people named Diana here. Let's just say that it says Diane, but maybe those are all supposed to say Diana. So if I do Control-H, instead of Control-F, Control-H takes you straight to the find and replace. If I type Diane and I replace that with Diana and I hit Replace All, that's a nice sound that tells you that it did something. It has made 6 replacements, so 2 in each of those columns. So every instance of Diane has become Diana, so that's pretty useful. I'm going to undo that by hitting Control-Z. And just to teach you that there's something called Control-Z. If there's a back button, you can undo the last thing you did. You made a mistake. You mistyped something. The cat jumped on the keyboard. You can always hit Control-Z to undo the last action. So I hit it again to get back to Diane instead of Diana. So that undoes that global find and replace that I just did. So here's the good part. I am going to select this column because I want this find and replace to only act on this column. I don't want to do this action on the entire worksheet, just on column B. So first I select column B and hit Control-H. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of these last names. So how can I get rid of all the last names at once? What I do is I use an asterisk, which in the search function means anything. It can mean anything at all. But I know that every last name has a comma after it. So I say star, comma, space. And that will represent any last name or anything with a comma and a space. See where I'm going with this? And so I could, if I typed in Johnson, what I'd be doing is I'd be replacing every last name with the name Johnson. Okay, but what I want to really do is just get rid of it. So I'm going to replace it with nothing at all. And when I hit Replace All, look what happens. They all went away. Good, I heard a cheer rise up from the audience. And you see why it was important to select column B? Because if I just done this, it would have nuked all the last names in all 3 columns. I didn't want to do that. So think about what we would do over here. We want to do something similar. We want to get rid of the first names. So I'm going to do Control-H. And now can someone from the audience tell me how to do this? What? So comma. So we want to keep the last name. And then what comes after the last name is what we want to get rid of. So that's always going to start with a comma. Good. Then what? We could do a space and then asterisk. Good. So anytime it sees a comma and a space and an asterisk, it's going to just delete it. We're replacing it with nothing. Here we go again. 14. So that message is useful because you might have 100 rows and you might get only 98 replacements, and you might discover that there are some middle names or some periods or some juniors or some doctors, and that whatever routine you did didn't get rid of all of them, or you might get 200 and discover that you did something you didn't intend to do. So keep an eye on that as a reality check. But what we did now is we isolated the first names and the last names without any formulas. So one more little trick here is to recombine the names, right? So we want to go from Alvarez, comma, Loretta to just Loretta Alvarez. And the way to do that is to use something called concatenate. And there's a formula version of that. But you can also do it this way. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come up here and say, call this combined. And I'm going to use this column for the combined names. And while I'm at it, let me just show you that we've got this nice formatting here where it says names and it's in bold, it's centered, you've got the border underneath it. I would like these other columns to have that same fancy formatting, but I might not even know where all these formattings came from. I can copy the formatting that I like and paint it to any other cell. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the Home ribbon. I'm going to click on the cell that I like, and I'm going to click Format Painter. And now it's hot. You see there's a paintbrush attached to my cursor. I can click on a single cell, and then I'm done. It won't paint that formatting anymore. If I want to do multiple cells, I get it hot again, and then I just click on a bunch of cells, the cells that I want. Okay, now I've got that same nice formatting everywhere else that I wanted it. So how do we put those names together? We say equals. That tells Excel that we're going to do some kind of a formula. Excuse me. And then I'm going to click on the first name. And what it does there is it inserts the reference of the cell. I clicked on B2, so it says whatever is in B2 is what I'm putting in D2. And then I hit the ampersand, and then I click on C2. That's going to take those two things and stick them together as text. Excuse me. And when I hit return, I'm almost there. So that gives me Loretta Alvarez, but what did I forget? Forgot the space. The way we generate a space when we're doing this concatenate routine is we add something in quotes. So whether it's a space or a name or other text, we insert another ampersand, and then let's do quotation mark, space, quotation mark, and then another ampersand. So I'm combining whatever's in B2 and a space and whatever's in C2. Now when I hit enter, I get Loretta Alvarez. So do we want to do this 12 times or 100 times? No. Excel is smart enough to figure out what we did and reproduce that. Anytime you have a formula that relies on these other cells, you can copy that formula down. And the way I do that is I select the cell that has the formula I like, and I hover the mouse over the lower right-hand corner until those little crosshairs pop up. And I click down on that and I drag it down. That copies the formula down. So in each row, it does what it did in the first row. It looks over two cells, adds a space, and it looks over one cell, it sticks it all together. If I want to copy it all the way down, I can keep dragging this. Drag, 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 drag. It might be, hundreds of cells. Or you can just double click on the crosshairs. Boom, it goes straight to the bottom and then stops. It's also smart enough that it doesn't copy that all the way down to row 1 million. If it does, you're going to have like a 20 megabyte Excel file. Having said that, the way it knows how to do that is it's looking for data here, and when it stops seeing data, it stops. So if you copied down like that, if you had a couple that were missing, it would stop, okay, when it saw that fire break. So when you do that trick of double-clicking the crosshairs, just make sure it went as far as it was supposed to go and stopped at the right place. Any questions so far? Yeah.
If you were to add a new name to the left, would it automatically fill everything in according to what you've already done? Smith, John at the very bottom.
So the question is, if I keep adding names in column A, will these other fields automatically populate? So let me point out that the thing I did to generate the first and last names was not a formula, so that's not going to copy. But if we put in John, Smith here, it does automatically fill in. I don't know if it will always do that, but again, in this version, it does see that you've added names. Another thing you might think about is if you add a row here in the middle somewhere, what happens? And what happens is that everything carries down, and that those formulas keep. All these references are different now because what used to be row 10 is now row 11, but Excel updates all those references correctly. We'll get into this more in the next unit where I show you how to copy some formulas over. All right, one more trick here, which is also relevant to doing basic formulas. I'm going to get rid of that row by hitting Control-Z. If anything happens to these names that I combined with this formula, then we're out of luck. Because the formula relies on this data. It's still combining. And let me point out that when I click here, up here is called the formula bar. It tells you what's really happening in that cell. So it looks like someone typed Gloria Brown here, when in fact there's a formula underneath the surface, which is combining stuff from others. So that's really important, right, in litigation, right? You want to know if someone typed in a number that might be wrong or fraudulent, or whether it's generated by a consistent formula. At any rate, if something happens to these names, you're going to lose your combined name. So if you want to preserve what you've done here, you don't want it to depend on these cells anymore. You just want it to stick no matter what. You can copy it and then paste the names back in place. But what you're going to do is you're going to, let's see, did I copy it yet? I copied it. We want to paste just the values, okay? Go to the Paste menu and click the drop down. There's all different ways you can paste what's on the clipboard. If you click the 1, 2, 3, it's going to paste in place the values that were generated by that formula. So now when you click here, these aren't formulas anymore, they're names. So what you've got here is the actual names. You could delete all that, and you would still have what you set out to do. So this is really useful when you're doing math. If you get the results you want, but you're worried that the underlying data might change, but you want to still have those results, copy it and paste the values in place. I'm going through this quickly, but this is something you can experiment with and make sure you've got the hang of it. Any questions? Move ahead. Yeah?
Could you have pasted so you had the values but kept your other columns?
Absolutely. I'm going to back up a little bit. Okay, so we're back. I'm hitting escape to get rid of these dancing ants here. So we're back to our formulas. I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to paste them over here. Paste. Great. So now here I still have the formulas. Column D and column E I have just the values. And maybe that's a good preliminary step to make sure that it's working properly. Great. Any other questions? I'm going to speed up a little bit. I'm going to go to the last tab, which is called Calculation Data. And this is more fictitious people and some dollar amounts that we're going to play around with. So here we've got 12 people, and maybe they're salespeople, or plaintiffs, or accounts. We've got two different figures here. And what we want to do is we want to come up with a formula that calculates the change from 2013 to 2014. So for each of these people, we want to subtract this number from this number. At this point, is anyone in the audience would kind of take out a Post-it note at this point and write the numbers down? No, a lot of smiles, but no one's admitting to it? Okay. So Excel, you've got a computer here. Excel is basically a math program. There's no reason not to exploit it because it's just waiting to do the math for you. So let's call this a difference. And let's create a formula. We start with the equal sign. It takes this number, so I click on it, and then I hit the minus sign, either from the number keyboard or next to the 0, and then I click on this one. So I'm generating a formula called F2 minus E2. When I click enter, it calculates the difference. And then we know that Excel will copy this formula faithfully, so if I double click here, it's going to do that all the way down. So in each cell, column G, it's taking the number one cell over, subtracting the number two cells over. And again, so I'll point out a couple things here. One of them is that, like before, these results depend on what's over here. So if we lose that information, we're not going to have a result anymore. So if what you care about is the result and you don't want it to depend on those other numbers, you should copy it and paste the values, like we did with the names. On the other hand, you might want it to be dynamic. You might want to always keep track of what the actual difference is as those numbers change, in which case you would want to keep the formulas, right? Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Another thing,
I want to convert from euros to dollars.
if you want to do what?
Convert from euros to dollars.
So if you want, the question is, how would you convert euros to dollars? Well, what you could do is you could, let's call this conversion. Do you know the exchange rate?
Let's just say 1.67.
So there are two ways you could do a conversion. Here, let's say we want to convert the difference from euros into dollars. We could take the number and then multiply by say 1.67. 0.67. No, what did I do? G2 asterisk 1.67. That will multiply that number by 1.67. And I drag it down. It'll multiply each of those numbers by 1.67. Just in terms of spreadsheet design, I would recommend that you do the following. Let's put the exchange rate in some out-of-the-way place because that exchange rate is going to change, right? You don't want to change 100 formulas every time the exchange rate changes. But if we put it up here, look what we can do. I'm going to delete these formulas. Now I'm going to say equals the difference times whatever is in this cell, I2. So you can build formulas like this that incorporate numbers or incorporate results of other formulas or all kinds of things. So I copy this. Now, okay, here's something went wrong. You got a bunch of zeros. This is a teachable moment. Remember how happy we were that Excel recognized the pattern that we created? Here, we said, look over here and subtract this number over here. When we copy the formula, it understood that it should keep changing those references as we move down. Well, it just did the same thing. Here I said take G2 multiply by I1, but when I copied it, it's taking G3 multiplying by I2, which has nothing in it. So that cleverness of Excel just came back to bite us. We don't want that reference to change every time. We want it to stay the same. So here's how you make it stay the same. when you write this formula and you click on I1, you want to tell it always I1. Don't be clever this time. Don't change that when I copy the formula. Just when I say I1, I mean I1. Hit the F4 button at the top of your computer, the F4 function button, and look what happens. It inserts these dollar signs. If you keep hitting it, it inserts different versions of those dollar signs. You want it to say $I, $1, and that's the first option. What you're doing is you're creating an absolute reference to cell I1, which will not change when you copy the formula. And again, this is in the manual too. This is something you might want to study up on. When you copy this, now you see each formula is multiplying by I1 because we anchored it with those dollar signs. Any questions about that? We're just scratching the surface of making formulas and copying them and anchoring references, but you should be getting an idea of what kinds of things you can do. Any questions? Okay.
Where do you
Yeah.
find the formulas? Multiplication is the asterisk. How do you find divide? How do you find?
Sure. So I have a keypad on my laptop, but the backslash, like you would use to make a fraction, that's for dividing. The asterisk is for multiplying. The little dash is for subtracting, similar to what's on a calculator. There are also a lot of built-in formulas, and I encourage you to explore all those built-in formulas. I'll show you one which is called sum. So for example, if we wanted to add up all the numbers from 2013 for all these sales reps, let's call them, we could do it like we did before on a calculator. We could say equals this one plus this one plus this one plus this one, but it's probably a better way to do this, right? And there is. You can say equals sum. That's a built-in function that does a particular thing with the cells that you feed it, which are called the arguments. When you open the parentheses, you can select a bunch of cells by dragging the mouse, and we'll add them all together. So it creates the syntax by itself. You don't have to remember that it's a colon. If you do, you can just type in. If you know you're adding cells E2 to E13, or there's 10,000 rows and you don't want to scroll all the way down, you can type in E2 colon E10,000. But here I've just dragged the mouse and it created the syntax for me. When I add the closed parentheses, I've created a formula that adds all those numbers. So I hit enter and it spits out the 56,000. So that is the sum of all of those numbers. Pop quiz, how do we get a similar formula for the 2014 numbers? We could paste it over, or the paintbrush would just make it look pretty. It wouldn't give us the formula. I would copy this formula. I would just slide the cell over, and it would copy the formula, right? And it reproduces those references. So again, that's Excel's being clever. Here, I'm telling it to add up the 12 numbers above the cell. So when I copy the formula, it does the same thing. It adds the 12 numbers above that cell, and it creates the correct syntax to do that. You could have, alternatively, just done the same thing over here. One more nice shortcut here. The sum formula is so popular, it's the most common thing you would ever want to do in Excel, that they've created two good shortcuts for it. One of them is the auto sum button. When you click there, it automatically creates a sum formula, and it anticipates what numbers you want to add. What it does is it looks for the numbers above this cell, which is useful sometimes. It stops when it sees text, but it will also stop if it hits a blank cell. So you've got to be careful there. So for example, I'm going to delete one of these numbers. And when I go down here and hit auto sum, it doesn't look beyond that blank cell. It's obvious now. I can drag this all the way to the top to capture the rest of them. But if I'm in row 10,000 and I think I'm adding up 10,000 numbers, but just one of them happens to be blank halfway up, I better be paying attention because the formula is not going to capture the whole column. It's stopping at the blank. Okay, one more trick for adding up the numbers. Two more tricks. If I'm too lazy to even hit the auto sum button, I can hit Alt equals. Holding down Alt and hitting equals also generates this formula. So Alt equals enter, boom, add up all the numbers with the same caveat that it's going to stop when it hits a blank or something that's not a number. So again, let's add up the euros here. I'm going to delete that. I know I want to add up all those numbers, so I hit Alt equals, enter. Boom, I've got a total of all those numbers. Any questions? Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm adding a entry to my spreadsheet, and if the sum, you know how at the end of the sum it's the last one, it's like it doesn't add an extra one. Let's say it's the sum ends at I 500, and then I'll add a couple of entries, and then if I don't check every time, a lot of times it ends up that it stay with the I 500, even though really the end now is now I 502. What is that? And so I'll have to go into that formula and go, change that number, that last number to the 502. Is there something I'm doing wrong, or is there some way to avoid that, or do I just check it every time?
So the question is, how do you get these sum formulas to update when you're adding new rows or adding some other information or otherwise changing the spreadsheet? And I don't know if there's a very simple answer to that. I think ordinarily, if you added rows, so let's go back here to where it says 56,000. If I add a couple rows, which I do by selecting two rows, right-clicking, and hitting Insert, that gives me two new rows. It's still 56,000. And you see that reference updated. Before it was E2 to E13. Now it's E2 to E15. So it expects you to still want that entire column. So that worked. We can add numbers here, and that total will still reflect that. But if you do something else, it's hard to anticipate all the different things you might do when you're adding the data. So I think the key is, as you've done, is just to be aware of what that formula is doing, making sure it's updating properly. It might be an issue with how the spreadsheet is set up. So the short answer is that it should update if you're adding rows like this, but better safe than sorry. You should keep your eye on it. Make sure it's doing what you intended for it to do. Other questions? Okay, we're running low on time. There's one thing that I want to show you that I don't like leaving any presentation without showing people what filters look like, because especially for litigators, I think filters are just absolutely crucial. By a show of hands, how many people work in any kind of a litigation? Okay, maybe a third or half of you. I'm a litigator. I spend a lot of time reviewing and producing or not producing my own clients' documents. I spend a lot of time reviewing documents that my litigation adversaries have produced to us. And a lot of those documents on both sides are spreadsheets. So there's this peculiar but great feature in Excel that can get you in trouble. It's called a filter. What the filter does, and I'm back on this spreadsheet called, the tab called Print and Filter Data. It's my fictitious matters. When I click somewhere and I go to Data, Filter, which is that icon that looks like a funnel, these little drop-down buttons appear on every column header. And Excel has done something kind of extraordinary there, although you don't really see what it's done. What it's done is it's looked at every column and calculated every possibility and organized every possibility in every column. So for example, I know there's a lot of different programs here, but I don't know how many there are, or what they all are. But now that I've turned on the filter, I can click this drop down, and it provides me a list in alphabetical order of what all the possibilities are. There's an advanced directives clinic, bankruptcy clinic, et cetera, and there's maybe 15 different ones. So that right there is very useful. You might have 20,000 rows and have no idea, are there 3 different clinics or 500 clinics? This has organized them all for you. And what it lets you do is, if you just want to look at certain types of records, you can click on the one you want to see. You have to deselect the button that says Select All, but I want to look at the Immigration Clinic Matters. So when I click on that and hit OK, it's only going to display the Immigration Clinic Matters. I can further filter it. Let's say I want to look at clients from Brooklyn. Okay, and it's telling me too there are 6 like that. 6 of 140 records found. That's really useful. So I know out of all these matters, 6 of them are Immigration Clinic Matters from Brooklyn. I can copy and paste this into another spreadsheet. I can do math here to see what this adds up to. Excuse me. So there's a whole world of possibilities here. But what I want to caution you about is that you need to be aware that this exists, because let's say that this is your own client's spreadsheet and you're deciding whether this is responsive in the litigation, whether you should produce this document or not. Just think about all the things that can go wrong if you're not aware that all that other data is in there. So this case might involve bankruptcy matters. So I'm looking for documents about bankruptcy matters, and I open up this file and I see it's all about immigration matters. I or my doc review attorney or my one of my associates reviewing this might not realize that there's a lot of relevant information in here about bankruptcy matters because they don't see it. And if they don't know what all these little funnels and arrows are, they'll just click not responsive and move right along. And now you've failed to produce responsive information. By the same token, what if instead it's already filtered for bankruptcy matters? Okay, if you don't understand how filters work, you might think that this is all about bankruptcy matters. It's responsive, it needs to be produced, and I don't see any issues with it. When in fact, all that other stuff in there might be highly confidential, or it might be privileged. There might be notes about certain kinds of records that reflect attorney advice, in which case you might have to withhold it, you might have to designate it attorney's eyes only, you just don't know. It depends on what's filtered out. So here you're producing something that maybe shouldn't have been produced or should have been produced differently. So now let's flip the coin and imagine that this is a document produced to us from the adversary. We open up the document to review it and see if it's useful in the litigation, what request it's responsive to. And what you might see is that it's about bankruptcy matters, but maybe this case is really about immigration. So we might think this is not really responsive and just click right by, when in fact all the good stuff is right in there if we would only undo the filter. Okay? You can hit clear to get rid of the filter. You can turn off the filter, make sure you're looking at everything. But again, in a world where your doc reviewers don't understand what filters are, you could be potentially missing important evidence. People talk about technological competence in the practice of law a lot nowadays, and I get invited to a lot of seminars about cloud computing and things like that. But when I hear technological competence, I think about filters, making sure I know what the evidence is, make sure I know what I'm producing and what's being produced to me in these spreadsheets. I think that about wraps it up, but I know you didn't come here to get preached at. You want to learn some tricks. Let me show you 2 more tricks. One of them is that using the filter, you can apply formatting to a lot of cells at once. So let's say we've got open matters and closed matters here. Maybe I want to gray out all the closed matters because they're distracting. I'm going to turn the filter on and choose closed. And now I can select all this stuff. And I'm going to go use these formatting tools. I'm going to select a nice shade of gray here. Now, you might be concerned that there's all those rows in between, right, that I'm not seeing, but they're still in there. Am I graying out all those matters also? I hope not, because then I did it wrong. There we go. Sure enough, we only formatted the ones that were displayed. And similarly, let's say I don't want all these blanks here in the Social Security numbers. I want to say TBD, because I'm working on getting those numbers, and I don't want blanks. So let's look for the blanks, which you can do. If there are blanks, then that's an option. It's always at the bottom, and boom, now you're looking at all the records with no Social Security number. If you're filling in a Privlog or something, you can go straight to the rows that haven't been filled out yet, things like that. So I'm going to type TBD, and I'm going to drag that down. And again, you feel uneasy, right? Am I overwriting all those Social Security numbers? You're not. When I'm done and I turn off the filter, all I've done is I've filled in TBD on just the blank ones, and the other ones were left mercifully alone. Any questions about the filters? If you haven't used these much, I would encourage you to play around with it and get the hang of it. There's a lot of neat things you can do with the filter tool. And I think I'm going to end it there. Hope you learned something, and thanks for coming.
And that's all there is to it. For more learning opportunities like this, including online tutorials and in-person training sessions, visit the Harris County Law Library's Legal Tech Institute website at www.harriscountylawlibrary.org/tech.